What up, though? We are back. It's Chris and company here for another episode. We do have a programming note that I will talk about at the end of this episode. Today's guest is West Michigan Whitecaps broadcaster, but I feel like that's partially doing him a disservice. You've seen the guy everywhere. Podcast. He does the Tighten Up podcast for U of D basketball. You've seen him around, very active on social media as well. Dan Hasty, a friend of the program, will be joining us today. We're going to be doing talking about his journey, and we are going to be doing some Tiger baseball talk as well as just kind of basic regular conversation with him. I've known Dan for a minute now. Really nice guy. I do consider him a good friend. So looking forward to that conversation. But before we get to that, just want to point things out here. If you're watching this and you're saying, look, I like this Castellani guy, and I like his content, but I wish there was a place that we could merge the two together. There is, and you can. CastellaniContent.com. There is your one-stop shop for everything that we put out. That thing is being updated every time we upload a piece of content, whether it's Michigan basketball stuff, the post-game videos. I'll say this, Chris and company, it's all there. Want to just throw a quick shout-out to our TikTok page. Our TikTok it's at Chris Castellani. My goal, assuming that TikTok still exists by the end of the year, is to get to 10,000 followers on there. We had, I think, around 1,500 several months ago, and we're well over 4,000 now. So I think that is an attainable goal. My number one thing when it comes to content is I want growth. I want continual annual growth, quarterly, monthly, yearly, what have you. I want the audience I want to see an uptick in audience production. We've been seeing that, so I just want to give that a quick shout out, and I appreciate all the people who continue to follow on there. All the other social platforms are linked on CastellaniContent.com. If you are watching this on YouTube and you want to see this beautiful face more, you can hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let's get those watch hours up. Continue to support us on all platforms. Like I said, there's a programming note. We'll talk about that at the end of the episode. But for the time being, I think that we got all the I was about to say prenuptials. I don't think that that's really the proper way to describe it, but we got everything out of the way that we need to get out of the way. Let's get to the main course of this meal, and that is our interview with West Michigan Whitecaps broadcaster Dan Hasty. Chris and company rolls on, and I feel like I make a mistake. Behind my body's going to cover this up, so it probably makes it seem like I could be lying, but I'm not. Right behind me is the photo of me and you from like 3 years ago when we were calling a game in West Michigan. There we are. There it is.
Look at that.
There it is for the people watching on YouTube. But Dan Hasty, West Michigan Whitecaps broadcaster, host of the Tighten Up podcast. You've seen him around. Swiss Army knife broadcaster for sure. You've seen him do basketball. You've seen him do volleyball. Joins the program today. Dan, nice to talk to you, buddy. How you doing?
It's cool to see this because, it's always fun because I'm sure you have this feeling too, to watch, to listen to, because in this case, obviously you're in both mediums, a podcast that you've frequented, and then to be a part of it, it's a real breaking the fourth wall type of feeling. So thanks for having me.
Of course. No, I've always used this comparison. It's like you watch a TV show, then all of a sudden you're a character on the show. It's a little bit of a weird juxtaposition, but obviously we've known each other for a minute. Before I get to the sports questions, I got to ask, because one thing I have not tapped into enough in my content is my knowledge and history with the campus of Central Michigan. Now, you're a CMU graduate. I'm a CMU attendee. And I'm just kind of curious because it's so much has changed. When was the last time you were on campus there, like just visiting?
Gosh. So Detroit Mercy had a game there a couple of years ago. I want to say it was either a year or two ago. I think it was last year, actually. So I got a chance to see the revamped McGuirk Arena. It was not called that when I was going there. It was simply Rose Arena back then. But I got a chance to spend, it was 04 to 08 there. I felt pretty lucky that I got out of the broadcasting program in 4 years. And that was when they had radio station that you got to be a part of. They had on-campus TV station. I actually was down to Central Michigan or Michigan State. That was my two college choices. I was trying to decide between those two. And I remember the person at Michigan State, whoever I talked to when trying to decide, told me that I have to wait 2 years before going on air at Michigan State. And the person at Central Michigan told me, he said, well, if you're good enough, you can go on tomorrow. So basically, that was the reason I picked Central Michigan, because I wanted to see how fast I could get on the air. And that's why I went.
Yeah, I worked on the campus radio station there too, and it was kind of I've never really told this story, but it was my last year there, and I was on one of the radio shows I did, one of the sports radio shows, and I got the gig prior to summer of 2017, and then in summer 2017 was when the Tiger videos started popping off. And for people who maybe been following from the beginning, like the old Tiger videos, not to say that they're G-rated now, but were like so profane. And I think I terrified the powers that be at Central Michigan, being like, we're letting this guy on the air, like with FCC regulations being what they are. And I was what, 22 at the time. But no, I will always have an affinity for SMU. I went back there. Last time I was there, I think was about 2 years ago. And it was a weird thing because there was an E. coli outbreak, so half the campus was shut down. I wasn't really able to go to like any of the bars or restaurants there for a time. But I always loved CMU, and they produce a lot of top talent, which I appreciate. But let's kind of take
real quick before you jump into that. I want to make one observation about this, because what you just said about your commentary, what you had when you started off your career, and what you brought to your social media commentary versus your on FCC regulated commentary.
Yeah, very buttoned up, yes.
I'm always very impressed when I can hear the difference between how somebody talks in one medium versus how they talk in another medium. I like to call it the Hugh Laurie corollary.
I like this.
If you know Hugh Laurie, he was the actor who played Dr. House on the TV show House. And if you ever listen to him talk on the show versus how he talks in real life, he doesn't sound anything like he sounds in real life versus how he sounds on the show. That's how you know he's good at his job. So that is always a measuring stick as to what kind of ability you have. So it's very easy to sound the same in both ways. So it's good on you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the other comp that I would make is it's so funny to me that like a whole generation knows Bob Saget as the dad from Full House, like the very wholesome. Bob Saget's stand-up is foul. Like it's really, and R.I.P. Bob Saget, obviously, he was hilarious, but it's just so funny that it's the association with one is so different than the association with the other. But it's interesting because we live in this age now, and I'm obviously I would consider myself very much a part of this, where what the parameters of broadcasting or getting your opinion out there in regards to sports have changed drastically from where they were 10, 20 years ago. Now, I would say the route you've gone is much more like standard, traditional. You go to college, you get your degree, and yet you see kind of this day and age where people are getting jobs in broadcasting just by streaming on Twitch or by starting a YouTube channel. Do you feel like it's easier in a way to get into the world of broadcasting than it's ever been, or do you still feel like, generally speaking, people kind of try to pay attention to that step ladder of making sure that you're hitting the beats, you're going to college, you're getting a degree, you're doing internships, stuff like that?
No, it's harder. It's harder now. And the reason that it's harder is because of the vast amount of content that is out there and available. So many people, I mean, the ability to create it is great, but everybody can do it and everybody does it. And just to be in that game and in that space, you have to know how to create. You have to learn all of these different things. The days of being just a one-trick pony are so outdated. I mean, you can't just have one specialty anymore. I mean, so for example, you mentioned the Tighten Up podcast. And, when they asked me if I wanted to do it, I said no, because the truth is that, I've done podcasts before and they are an extreme amount of work. And there's so much of a bear, but the only way that it any podcast is worth doing, and you do a good job of this with your show, is the representation of those types of clips that go out with it on social media. If you don't do those, what's the point of doing the show?
Mhm.
So that's the kind of stuff that has to happen in order to make that show successful and salvageable. So everybody's doing that. And there's so many different places where you can get that stuff. So not only do you have to do it, but you have to do it well, and it has to stand out. So it's becoming more and more difficult because more and more people have the opportunity to do it. So the trick now becomes, how do you stand out? So that's where people really have to find ways to be unique.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where I love being able to do like what I'm able to do. And I don't like to go with the whole, like, oh, it's such hard work, because, some people have to hunt for their food. Like, I'm a very lucky person in that aspect, but I think sometimes people get it wrong, whether it's like on your end, my end, or anybody else's end, where they think the work is the hour or so in which you're doing the podcast. That's actually a very small percentage of that's the content itself. But as you say, and this is a piece of advice that was given me at my last job, a majority of your podcast viewership or listenership comes from the 1-minute clips that you'll post on TikTok. It's just the generation that we kind of live in now. Like, my most viewed TikTok clip from this show has like 70,000 views, and our most watched episode on YouTube has like 5,000. It's just the way that people consume media nowadays. So I do kind of buy into the idea of it is harder because people are going to swipe more quickly. People are not going to say, I'm going to give this podcast a full episode listen, give it a few chances to see if he kind of grows. It's 10 seconds in, not really buying it. Scroll. So it is probably a lot more difficult than it used to be. One thing that I think makes you valuable, and it's like this with several really good broadcasters I know, is the fact that you do a lot of different sports. And you brought up the podcast a minute ago, but you've done basketball, you've done volleyball stuff, and obviously baseball. Does your prep work change depending on the sport you do, because you need to fill a little bit more time potentially with a sport like baseball where there's not as much consistent action as, say, a basketball or volleyball?
It depends. And to your point, take that into play-by-play and into that arena.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of my work goes into getting ready for games. It's very, very small in terms of the amount spent actually calling a game versus the amount it takes getting ready for a game. It's not exactly an all-nighter, but sometimes it feels pretty close. Mm. So, if I'm getting ready for a baseball game, getting ready for a game in April is very different than getting ready for a game in August or September. By August and September, I've been around my team in 5 months. I know those guys front to back. I know their stories. I know their families. I know them extremely well. And that's even considering a lot of roster turnover. So there's also that to contend with. So now it's about learning the other side. It's about learning the other players and understanding where they are, where they've come from. And thankfully, we've seen them enough to also know them a pretty good bit. But as it pertains to college basketball or volleyball, those players we see far less. Yeah. So that comes in to a lot more prep. I feel like the prep involved with college hoops, with volleyball, far supersedes what's done with baseball. And baseball is different because it's every day.
Yeah.
Baseball, there's just not enough hours in the day to give to prepping for baseball. There's just too many things happening on a daily basis. But thankfully, because baseball is happening so frequently, you're just in that space. You're just around everyone so often that you're going to absorb so many different encounters and so much information along the way that you're going to be ready just because of the proximity in which you work.
Yeah, and I've made this comparison before, and I mean it as a positive, but I always view baseball broadcasters, local broadcasters, to a certain extent like game show hosts, where there's a comfortability that would come with an entire generation turning on Jeopardy and, hey, there's Alex Trebek, right? Or was Wheel of Fortune. I feel that way with local broadcasters, where as a season goes on, especially, you feel like you get to know them more the way that they get to know the players more, and it becomes kind of this communal thing. And one observation that I'm not the only one to notice this by any means, but like Michigan consistently, but even more so in the modern age that we're in right now, is so loaded with great broadcasters. I mean, you go down the list, we got Dickerson, Benetti, George Blaha, Dan Miller, and obviously he's long passed away now, but like kind of starting there with Ernie Harwell. And to me, that's the appeal of broadcasters. I could be wrong. I feel like that's a very Midwest thing, and we've been very fortunate, like all the way down to even the minor leagues with what guys like you are doing. Why do you think it's a coincidence, or do you think there's a specific reason why Michigan attracts really good broadcasters?
I think we have a very loyal and a very intelligent fan base. I think people in Detroit care a lot, but I always have respected their intelligence. The baseline intelligence of the Detroit sports fan is higher than most fan bases.
I would agree.
And, you talk about broadcasting on the local level, because broadcasts, especially in TV form, are so readily available. We can watch them on TV, but we can also watch them on our phones now so easily that now we don't really need to rush to hear a TV call. It's so easy to access. But now what we're doing is we're making it a point to go hear the radio call.
Yeah.
Now we want to go hear how Dan Miller called those plays. Now we want to hear how Dan Dickerson called that play. So now it's special with the Red Wings, Ken Cal. Right. So that's still the one thing left. And that's why there is still a romance about radio and sports that you just can't replace. That makes it really, really special. So that's one of the things that I love about this town, because it's always embraced its broadcasters. And I would say it's propped them up more so than most towns. I think sometimes towns can be a little bit too hard and too critical on some of their broadcasters. You go to some big cities, I think you see that more. Yeah. But one of the things that I always think is I always gravitated towards, and Ernie Harwell was always the first influence for me. And the reason Ernie became that was because I remember asking my mom when I was really young, I said, "Who's your favorite Tiger?" And I figured, it was going to be Kaline Lolich. Well, her answer was Ernie. And so that's because that was the relationship that was built. And those people outlast the careers of just about every player. So those are the people that we keep with us for generations. So they outlast managers, players, coaches, ballparks. I mean, you name it. So that's why that is one of the most special relationships that you can have with a team.
I would agree. And especially if you're somebody, a huge fan who watches or listens every day. I brought it up earlier, the familiarity that comes with it, even if it's not specifically related to the broadcasters. Like, I can't drive by a wall side windows without thinking about a pitching change. Like, it's just, that stuff is ingrained in your head at this point as a fan, and the kind of familiarity that you become accustomed to. I always like to ask this question because I get a lot of varying answers, whether it's from broadcasters or athletes or actors. Do you go back and watch or listen to your broadcasts and study them the way that an athlete does, like game film?
Almost daily. I will, at least for maybe 20 minutes a day. Usually it's my drive to the ballpark. I will put on the audio of a broadcast. So if it was an audio based broadcast, I'll listen to the audio. If it was a video based broadcast, I'll put it on at the ballpark off to the side as I'm putting my scorebook together. And I'll just, at least if nothing else, try to take in a half inning or an inning from the night before, because there's a couple different reasons for that. we have a lot of different elements that we try to work into broadcast, try to see if those look the way we thought that they would look. But it's the most painful thing that you have to do in our business is to go back and listen to yourself. But it's also the most necessary thing. For years, I didn't do it. I didn't want to do it. But once I started doing it, that's when things really, really started to change. And that's when I started to learn the most. So yeah, for young broadcasters, that's one of the first things I always tell them. I say, do yourself the hard favor of listening to yourself and just grin and bear it, because that's going to be the one thing that makes you really, really good at this.
I feel like it is a necessary evil, and yet I have talked to people who are like, I can't stand it. Like maybe they do it, but it's just it's a chore for them. Yeah, it's a chore for them to get through. I've been kind of consistent asking these questions to people that have been around the Tigers organization for several years now, because my whole thing, and we've talked about this with the Lions too, with Brad Holmes, where people talk about there's been changes. The organization's different. They're going through, they go about things in a much different way. But I feel like that's kind of an abstract thing to say. Like, I'm always curious as to how have they gone about changing and what have the changes been specifically. And so I will get to that in a second. But I wanted to start more so with the fact that the first time that we called a game was during this transitional period where Al Avila had recently been let go, but the Tigers, I don't believe, had hired Scott Harris yet. And so it was this kind of 2-month stretch where, it was kind of a weird period where you didn't know, you were probably running into people not knowing if you were going to be seeing them after the next several months. I'm just curious, like, what was, from your standpoint, what was morale like during that time in which it wasn't necessarily a guarantee that everyone you were running into was going to still have jobs within the organization after, the next several months?
I think people are pretty smart, and I think people understand what that means when something like that happens. So when Al was let go, I think most of the people who Al brought in probably knew where that was headed. So they knew that more than likely that was going to be a change of scenery for them. But, it's not a guarantee. It's look at a guy like Ryan Garco. I mean, he was brought in by Al Avila, and now he's an assistant general manager, and he's killing it. So, I mean, there's exceptions to that rule. But I would say, during the time that we did that game, I mean, they were kind of in a foster home situation, and they did end up finding themselves their way through. But, in the course of a couple of years, it is stunning. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. I mean, they have a playoff caliber team and a top 5 farm system. Yes. I mean, we've known each other a long time, and they have not had that since we've known each other. They have never had that. And that's always the goal. The great teams have that. The Baltimore Orioles, the LA Dodgers, the Tampa Bay Rays, and now your team has that. And that is the one thing that everybody and their brother in this game is chasing.
Yeah. What have been the biggest changes in your mind that have led to player development and just the overall kind of tone within the organization being a lot more positive over the last several years?
Attentiveness and the paying attention to the right details. Attentiveness in the sense of they're paying attention to every single player individually and specifically. So not just to player X, but to that particular player's skill set. So how do we optimize exactly what they have, and how do we put together a plan for that particular player? This is not a, hey guys, let's keep our eye on the ball today. Okay. Like this is a, hey, how do we tailor a plan for you and you and you and you and you? And how does it look different for all of you? So, they just have more manpower in that way. I get it. They don't go out and spend the kind of money in free agency that people want them to. But look what they're creating. Look what they are unearthing and the contributors that they're finding. And for the record, historically, free agencies, by and large, been a zero-sum game. it has been more of a detriment than it has been a help in the last 20 years. Now, it's not to say it's never helped. It's helped in some cases, but they're in this position now for the first time in maybe since I've ever seen them, where they are finally producing real pieces that can really help them. And they don't have to go throw a bunch of money at all these different positions. Remember when they were doing this 10 years ago? They had to throw everything. They don't have to do that anymore. Now, do we want to see? I mean, I know Alex Bregman is a thing, and that's been a conversation now, which feels like forever now.
Yeah, it has. Part of this is his fault because this has been an ongoing saga since like November.
Yeah, but it's at the point now where it's like, have we not seen what this team has been able to put in front of us for a year and a half, 2 years now? Like, they have been able to, when you get these prospects, usually, and we said this when they were making trades over the past so many years, you get 4 prospects in a deal and you hope 1 or 2 of them hit. Right. They are making
it's different now.
More of those guys hit. And if let's say if only 2 of those guys hit, they're going to find a way to get 2 other guys to come up and help them. It's starting to happen the way it's supposed to happen. Player development is everything in this game right now because of economics. That is so vital to the operation. The way they're doing it right now is giving them a cheat code. And they're going to need it because of so many different factors. So, you know what? If Alex Bregman wants to join them, then great. And if he doesn't, what did AJ Hinch say a couple of years ago? All right, we'll beat you.
We'll beat you. Yeah, it's a funny thing as a fan because I'll be like Dwight Schrute when he's giving that speech, and I'll be pounding the podium in front of me with frustration about the lack of spending, and then I'll end it by saying, yeah, I still think the team's going to be pretty good. It's a weird thing where like you'll get frustrated, but then you look at the pieces. And the other thing I've acknowledged, it ain't like the rest of the division's doing anything. The Twins aren't outspending. Guardians aren't outspending. I mean, the Tigers are going to bring back basically the same team that they had a year ago. And I think in terms of the attention to detail that you brought up, it really is important because there was a time during the Avila era in which people talked about the Tigers as a top 5 farm system when they had Mize and Manning and Skubal, and they had Torkelson in there and Riley Green. And my whole argument was, once you get past those guys, there's not much here. And I think what we've seen from the organization over the last several years is building on the importance of depth. Right now, this team has about 8 different starting pitchers that are going to be competing for 5 spots this upcoming spring training. That's really not something that they've had where you can have a guy or 2 get injured and you can call another guy up. I think a player like a Wencel Perez is a great example of this, where is he some superstar? No, not necessarily, but he's an important part of the team. And he's the kind of guy that you want coming up through the organization. So I think, they've been huge. There have been huge strides in that department. There's a couple.
Can I say something about that?
Go ahead.
So to a guy like a Wencel Perez's point and a guy like Parker Meadows' point.
Yeah.
Those guys weren't doing anything like what they were doing until 2 years ago. And what happened 2 years ago? I mean, and look, those guys were always talented players. That's it, and I really do believe I've learned this during my time in professional baseball, is that most of these guys are similarly talented, other than like your A-Rods and your Bryce Harpers and your Paul Skeenses of the world. Like most of these guys that come out of the draft are pretty much of the same talent level, but it all comes down to how hard does this guy work? That's number one. You have to have guys who work really, really hard. And number 2, how good your player development. And I mean, that's why the LA Dodgers every year take a guy in the 40s, and then a year later, he's a top 10 prospect in baseball. It's not an accident. Take the names off of these guys. If you have good development, you will have good prospects. Like Baseball America just came out with their top 30 Tigers prospects, and Jaden Ham's number 11. Like he was top 100 like during the season last year. That's crazy that he's now number 11 for them. And he really didn't do anything to warrant sliding down that much, but it's just it's a reflection of where they are as a system.
Yeah, and I remember one of the big things that was said when Harris was hired that a lot of fans kind of preached was he was left with nothing. And I did kind of have to put my hand up and say, well, let's find out, because and what we've learned, and it's kind of what it was my original thesis, which is Al Avila's issue is not the acquiring of talent. There was a lot of talent within this organization at the major league level. There was a lot of talent at the minor league level. It was the development of that talent. And I think the two players that you just brought up with Wenzel and Parker Meadows. I mean, Parker Meadows, I think, has the ceiling to potentially be the best player on this team, legitimately, with what he can do defensively and what he can do on the base paths. And he was a late bloomer. And I think a big reason for it is they finally gave him the pieces to be able to develop him as a player. Now, I want to talk about a few top names, because one thing I think is cool about where you're at professionally is, you know, those guys who jump on something and say, I liked it before it was cool. You kind of earn the right to do that, because you get to say, yeah, I watched him in high A ball. I knew he was going to be really good. And so you've had the luxury within the last year or so of following some of these guys within the system. And so I guess we'll just jump right into the big name, which is Max Clark. And I've seen a few interviews where you've talked about him, and I did an interview with him last year as well. And I think we're both in agreement, like, for 19, 20 years old, really well-spoken, like just sharp beyond his years guy. Really strikes me as somebody who studies the game of baseball. And he's talked about how Bryce Harper was like one of his big heroes growing up, which hearing somebody say I watched Bryce Harper growing up makes me feel very old, but that's a conversation for another day. But I think just in terms of what you viewed on his day-to-day, what do you think are some of the intangibles that maybe aren't getting talked about with him that Tiger fans and the rest of the league can be excited about?
I'm very big on the range of outcomes when it comes to prospects, or just players in general, but especially players who have those major league ceilings. What is your range of outcomes? How high is your ceiling? And when I think about Max, there's a ceiling there that goes even farther than a Major League Baseball career.
Yeah.
Max's ceiling, I see him on Shark Tank. Like that's his ceiling to me. Like, he might be on Shark Tank before all is said and done. He is that kind of person. And I think you understand what I'm talking about. Like, just having that kind of winner's mindset, I think, is a big deal. And I think we've seen that with a handful of players. I've seen it with guys like Colt Keith, for example, just that kind of unwavering confidence in oneself. And Max, he also is out to do so much good with the gifts he has. He knows that he's got a lot of talent, but he also wants to use that to help people. And I didn't think any part of him acted or came across like a 19-year-old kid. I mean, you'd walk away and just have to laugh about it, because you thought that you were talking to someone who had already played in the major leagues for 10 years. You know, it's taking everything in me to not want to ask our manager, hey, you give this guy a day off on this day, you mind if we sneak him up into the booth that night? Like, that's the kind of talent that he has. Like, he could easily be in a broadcast booth. He's that good. He's that well-spoken. So there is real potential for him to be far beyond a baseball player when all is said and done.
He's the kind of guy that's going to go 3 for 4 at Comerica, then record a podcast afterwards that's going to get like 100,000 downloads. Like, you know, you're right, though. He has that kind of personality, and I think that he's going to be, if he hits, you know, just as a player, which I believe he will, I mean, he'll be immediately like probably the first real, even more so than Riley Green, the first position player we've had here in a long time where people are going to really pay to see him. Because like, you just watch his high school tape, you're like, this guy is really fun to watch. And I think the abundant confidence that he has without it coming across as arrogance, I think is very impressive. Like, the guy believes in himself and he knows he's going to be a good player. But you also get the impression that he's a team player as well. So no, I enjoyed my conversations with him. I'm looking forward to see him progress through the minor league.
Keep this in mind too. He will be the first player that people from other cities around baseball go to see once he makes the major leagues. We're already seeing it in the minor leagues. This kid's got 1 million social media followers, and it's only getting bigger. He's going to hit the major leagues with a massive following. He is going to get followed around and watched by baseball fans all over the game in a way that not even Miguel Cabrera or Justin Verlander had when they came up to the major leagues. And it's only going to get bigger from there.
Yeah, I watched the vlog that he did the night he was drafted, and his dad said he is, even before he was drafted, was in the top 1% of most followed baseball players on social media. He hadn't even played a game in the minor leagues yet. And I know, like, people can poo-poo that and say, oh, social media was that, but like, it does imply that, one, you know how to grow a brand, and two, you have some personality that people are attached to. And so it's going to be very interesting to see him come up. You mentioned during that conversation there, Colt Keith. And I just want to kind of throw this out there because I'm under the impression, I think Scott Harris like loves Colt Keith. I think he thinks Colt Keith is like the dude because he was not, this wasn't a Scott Harris problem, but it was an Avila draft pick that Harris was the one who said, we got to give this guy, an extension. Now he's gone from being the second baseman of the future to the first baseman of the present. Just on hearing about that, were you surprised by that news? Not so much with the development of the bat, which I think is going to come along, but are you surprised that they made the change to move him to first base that quickly into his career?
Yes, but I don't know if it's a long-term move. I think it's a this year move. This is one of those things I think we're going to have to get used to in the modern day of baseball. I think this year Colt Keith is a first baseman, but what happens a year from now if all of a sudden there's an opportunity to bring in a right-handed hitting first baseman or somebody that can allow Colt Keith and the flexibility he has? Because look, what if Gleyber Torres isn't there a year from now? Now, all of a sudden, Colt Keith's right back at second base where he was before. I don't think anybody thinks that he can't play that spot. And he was better as the season went along last year. So I think he could easily go back to that spot. So AJ Hinch has always wanted that kind of player. So just because he's at first base right now doesn't mean I think he's there forever. There are some guys where I think, if they're there, they have to stay there. I always thought Miguel Cabrera should have stayed at first base forever. And even when they signed Prince Fielder, like I mean, they moved him over to third because they had to. Yeah. But I mean, DH would probably have been the move. Mm-hmm. But still, like you can't clog up your DH spot. So like they're trying to win in all those little margins right now. So the team that they have this year is going to look different from the team that they have next year, even if the names stay vaguely the same. They're still going to move pieces around because this is what they're training those guys to do at the local level and at the minor league level. So if guys can come up and play 2-3 positions, that's something they'll take advantage of.
AJ loves versatility, and it's why there was a period last year when the Tigers were making roster moves, and the one guy who people would ask me about, and I would always say he's safe, he's not going anywhere, was McKinstry. Just because if you have if you're choosing between that second to last man on the roster, that last man on the roster, you're going with the guy who can play 4 or 5 different positions. And I think that AJ loves that.
Can we talk about AJ for a second? Because, you asked about what's different about what the Tigers have been doing.
Yeah.
To me, it starts with the fact that they empowered their manager last year to basically pull off the baseball equivalent of Ocean's 11.
Yes.
And totally hack into the system, break in and steal the money from the casino. Like there was no business that the Tigers should have made the playoffs last year. None. And yet they found their way in. I honestly, it felt as if someone gave AJ Hinch the cheat code to the video game, and he just kept pressing the button every single night. There was no rhyme or reason why that happened. They had just traded a bunch of their veteran pieces away. Who knows who they had on the mound on any given night? Everybody else probably was looking around going, what the hell is happening? And yet they found a way to make the playoffs. The fact that, and I've said this before, Cleveland was going to win 95 games no matter who was managing that team.
Yeah.
The Detroit Tigers had no business doing what they did towards the end of that season, even with talented players. But AJ Hinch did not get nearly the amount of credit that he deserved.
He gets the credit from the people like us who watch the games and knew how he, because that's the thing when voting for stuff like that, people are more so paying attention to the actual results and what they did. If you watch the game by game, that was one of the best coaching or manager jobs in the history of Detroit, if you ask me. Like legitimately top 3.
It's one of the best coaching jobs pulled off in Major League Baseball over the last quarter century. And
I would agree.
We're talking about the Cleveland Guardians.
Yeah, and it's funny because like as much as I love and respect the principle of Moneyball and the story of Moneyball, when you watch that movie, it totally leaves out the fact that they had 3 Cy Young caliber pitchers in their rotation. Whereas like to me, when you look at what the Tigers did, they had the best pitcher in baseball and basically 4 bullpen days for about a month. And it just kept every guy firing darts. I mean, Herter and Hannafy and Gunther. It's a combination of tremendous strategy and good luck where I think AJ set up all the pieces brilliantly, but nobody could have expected that like Herter was going to be striking out 11 batters per 9, or that, or Montero was going to be throwing a complete game, or all these guys were going to be pitching really well, but made for good luck. Going back to Colt Keith for a second, because I feel like I kind of left out the elephant in the room, which is the fact that, and I like Colt Keith a lot. And I think that in many ways, the second half before they really got red hot, they kind of treaded water in July and August in large part because he really started to come alive as a player. But let's be real, he would still be at second base right now if the production was there from Spencer Torkelson. And, you saw Torque when he had really just that one full year in the minors. But I feel like every person who saw Torque in the minor leagues got the full Torkelson experience, which was really, he had the walk-off in his first game, but besides that, a lot of struggles. Then he got red hot. He goes to AA, a lot of struggles. Then he got red hot. AAA, same thing. I feel like that's kind of been a reflection of the player he's been in the major leagues as well. I guess from your standpoint, did you see, because I could write a novel trying to break down exactly what's happened or what's going on with Spencer Torkelson. I'm just curious from your standpoint, based on what you saw when he was in the minors, did you see any of these problems rearing their ugly head the way that they have at the major league level, or did you think that he was always just going to find it eventually?
When you have the pedigree of being a number 1 overall pick, it's easy to assume that they'll figure it out. And that's sort of what happened during his time when we saw him. But one of the things that did stand out was a very, very slow start. Over the first 2 weeks with us, it was very, very rough. I think he had maybe 3 hits in the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so I remember thinking, okay, well, that's a little concerning only in the sense of it's a new league. It's different pitching. There's an adjustment to be had. He'll make it, but what does that look like as he climbs the ladder? Because it's okay to have adjustments that you need to make. You can make them in AA. You can make them in AAA. But as we know, there is a monumental gap between AAA and the major leagues. Yeah. So you can make those incremental adjustments because there's not a huge difference between high A and AA. There's just not. Between AA and AAA. There's just not. But the one difference that everybody knows, minors and majors. So can you make that adjustment there? That's going to be where rubber meets the road for Spencer. And it looked as if he actually had figured something out. And I didn't ever know if he was ever going to be a 330, 100 guy. But he could have been what he was, a 230, 30, 90 hitter. It's still semi-valuable in today's game. But again, I don't think anybody, it's tough. You're taking a righty first baseman, 1-1. It was a tough draft even there.
Right, yeah.
There wasn't a whole, looking back on it, I don't think anybody would have taken a different player. I think that was still the right player to take, given the backstory, the pedigree, everything that we knew about him. But now it just comes down to, the front office that has him is paying attention. They look at the right details. I think they've proven that. So now it's just on Spencer Torkelson to be able to make those adjustments. Now, it's easier said than done. And if he can make them, I think they tap into a much improved player, just like they've been able to unearth with so many of these other guys. But I think the reason that we're seeing Spencer Torkelson struggle is because those adjustments just don't come naturally to everyone. So is the book totally closed? No, I don't think so. But this is a really important offseason for him. I think we can all agree on that.
For sure. I think that, especially when you get to a point where, and I've asked a million different people to kind of give me an assessment, a lot of times it just ends with them saying, yeah, I think it might just be mental. I mean, that's a very difficult thing to break down because you never really know exactly what someone's going through. I will say, I think mentally, in a bizarre way, they are putting him in the best position even by not having him start the year as the first baseman, because I think the sheen of number one pick, top prospect, future 35 home run guy, that's all gone now. Just go play baseball. It's not no one's really looking at you at this point as that guy. It's just be somebody who can be productive for this team. Maybe that allows him to relax a little bit. At least I hope so. Because, you don't go 1-1 on accident. Even with the COVID year draft, you got to have a ridiculous amount of talent just to get to that point. And hopefully he finds it. Who's someone, because I think that one of the really cool things about what Scott Harris is doing with the organization right now is the fact that we're seeing these guys who we hadn't heard of a year or two ago, and all of a sudden they become big names within the organization and potentially across all of minor league baseball. Who's someone in the organization right now that you feel like not a lot of people are talking about that could end up being a really key piece of the major league club at some point in the future?
I don't know. I feel like everyone talks about Max Clark and Kevin McGonigal. I feel like we don't have enough time to talk about the other guys lately. But, Josue Briseño, does that count? I mean,
that counts.
He's a guy that, we spent a lot of time. And I mean, if you're really into the Tigers minor league system, you know a lot about Max Clark and Kevin McGonigal and Jackson Jobe and probably even Tyrone Lorenzo after he came over in the Flaherty deal last year. But Josue Briseño last season at 19 years old was doing things that even made AJ Hinch take notice in spring training. And AJ loves this guy. And then he ended up having a really good start to the season in Lakeland. Then he got hurt. He messed up his knee and didn't play most of the year. Well, then he ends up going to the Arizona Fall League, and he literally turns into, was it John Dowd, the old guy from the video game? His alter ego. And he becomes the destroyer of worlds, and he wins the Triple Crown in that league. And I think, if memory serves, I think he hit more home runs in the Fall League, he did, than he hit in each of the last 2 seasons combined.
Wow.
So Josue is a first baseman. He can catch a little bit too, but he's a guy that is cut of that first baseman, monster power, really, really good eye at the plate kind of hitter. And he is a big dude, big, imposing, 20 years old, 6'4", 200. And he again is just one of these guys that has made his prospect stock go absolutely off the rails and off the charts. And this is one of the things that Tigers fans have to be excited about, because they continue to just optimize guys like this over and over again. And he's not the first, he won't be the last, but Briseño hits the absolute tar out of the baseball, and Briseño is going to be really fun. I think we get him in West Michigan. So I think going into the season, it's going to be cool, because I think West Michigan gets Max Clark, Kevin McGonigal, and Briseño as their heart of the order. So I don't expect to have them for very long.
Right. Yeah. No, I think the other thing that we're seeing too, and when you kind of look down the list, is I think Scott Harris, to his credit, has been very consistent with the kind of player he wants. in this organization. And he said it from day one. Is like, look, we want to dominate the strike zone. And while they've gotten better with that at the big league level, I think at the minor league level is where it starts. And you're seeing high on base, a lot of pop, a lot of power. And like, I could have another guest on and we could debate where baseball's at. But at the end of the day, those are the players that are making money nowadays. And those are the kind of players that are being seen at the big league level.
Can I tell you something about Scott? So
yeah.
I've been fortunate enough to have a few encounters with Scott to this point. And I can tell you this, and I can tell your listeners this. For everything that you want Scott Harris to be, whether that's as an individual, as a baseball executive, as a creative thinker, or just as a guy, just as a dude, he's that guy. He is the guy you hope he is. He is funny, he is engaging, he is smart, and he really has that idea about how to run a baseball team. Now, he has constraints that he's going to work within. He has certain things that he has to figure out, but he is obsessed with winning within those margins. And he's told me that he is a minor league baseball TV obsessive. He watches every single night to Toledo, Erie, West Michigan, Lakeland. I mean, that's how he came up. I mean, he was watching those games every single night. So that's his background. That's his development. And that's what he cares about in terms of getting these guys ready for the major leagues. So, I mean, the imprint in Detroit is all over where this has started at the minor league level. And it's going to continue that way. So you should be very, very happy that you have him running your baseball team.
And I mean, I think he comes so highly recommended as a disciple of Theo Epstein, which is like, I don't probably don't talk about this. Like Theo Epstein's basically my idol, like just as a baseball personality and kind of as a guy, like just this, kind of underdog, 20 something who ended up turning around two organizations. But I think one thing I remember noticing about Theo Epstein, especially with the Cubs, is that those first few years, he was so, I'm not going to say void of personality, but he was just so quiet and everything was so tight lipped. And when the Cubs started winning, he's partying with Eddie Vedder. He's, getting drunk on TV, after they're clinching the pennant, like he'll start to open up as this team, as the success. You even saw it a little bit last season when they made the playoffs. I mean, I knew right away, and this was the one thing I said the day we hired him, is like, I know that this is a very sharp guy. There will probably be some quarrels I might have about, mainly with the free agency stuff and how they're choosing to assemble their roster. But I know that this guy has a superhuman-like knowledge of the sport of baseball. And I think it's a big reason why we're seeing the organization grow the way that it has. One thing that I think is so cool about what you get to do is I just love the charm of minor league baseball. And you could say it's about all baseball in general, but I think that it's something that I wish there was a way where Major League Baseball could do a better job of like tapping into it, because I've always appreciated just that kind of natural charisma that comes with the sport. I'm curious, as somebody who's kind of traveled around, what's a random quirk about a specific minor league park that you've been to that you just love? Like whether it's a statue or something that plays after a home run, just a little thing that you really like about a certain ballpark that you've been to.
So my favorite ballpark in our league is Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne is it was built, I think, about 15 years ago, but it is consistently ranked in the top 10 ballparks in all of minor league baseball. So if you ever get a chance to take a road trip and you want to go see one of the coolest minor league ballparks, and it's pretty well known in minor league circles, some of the best ones. Nashville has a great park. Charlotte has an awesome park, and Fort Wayne, they're some of the best ones. But Fort Wayne, the cool thing about that one is that it's not just a ballpark, it's also a public park.
Okay.
So what that means is that every day, whether the Tin Caps, that's the name of the team, they're the Padres affiliate, whether or not they're at home, that stadium is open to the public every day from 8 to 5 p.m. and people walk through it and they'll do laps around, the old folks will bring their joggers and do laps around. And I mean, it's just part of that community. So they do, something there that I don't think I've seen anywhere else. So that makes Fort Wayne pretty special.
That's a cool quirk. Yeah, I didn't know that, and I'll have to look it up immediately after we're done with this episode. But yeah, I've always appreciated that stuff. Like if you've been to the Lugnuts Park, which is about 10-15 minutes from my house, and they got the apartments there now, which is like, that's kind of a bucket. I want to watch a game from there just at some point. Like I honestly, I literally, if I had the financial means, would consider living there just to be like, yeah, I get to watch baseball every day, not just on television, but I can literally watch it from my apartment. One last question. It's more of a personal question, just out of curiosity, because we didn't get a chance to talk about this much, but you have done some stuff for the Grand Rapids Gold. I was looking at them, and I don't know if you even know the answers to this, but how is it that the Denver Nuggets affiliate is in Grand Rapids, Michigan? Is that a normal thing in the NBA?
So basically, to know about how Denver and the Gold ended up together is to know the backstory of how they ended up together. The Grand Rapids Gold used to be the Motor City, was essentially the Grand Rapids Drive.
Okay.
And the Grand Rapids Drive used to be affiliated with the Detroit Pistons. And so a couple of years ago, it was around COVID, the Pistons decided to move to Detroit. They decided to move their G League team to Detroit. Yeah. And so in doing that, Grand Rapids' team was left without a dance partner, essentially. So they were kind of in a spot where, music was playing and the music stopped, and they needed a chair to sit down in quick. And lucky for them, they had a really good reputation of attendance, of support, of being able to take care of players, of ownership. So the Denver Nuggets ended up calling them, and Denver's also done a really good job when it comes to player development. And so it's not the most logistically friendly setup. There are a lot of minor league baseball teams that also have to deal with
right.
this. But the circumstances led to the Gold and the Nuggets coming together, and now they are affiliates, because a lot of teams, and you've noticed this, have close by major league or NBA affiliates. Mm-hmm. The Motor City Cruise has the Pistons. The Windy City Bulls have the Chicago Bulls. So many of those teams are closely affiliated, but there are a few that are not. And Grand Rapids is in one of those unique situations. But it's a testament to them, because if you have an NBA affiliate who's that far away, it's because your product is just that good. So they're actually doing that good of a job to get a team like Denver on board. So, I got to give them credit for that.
Interesting. Well, dude, I could probably talk to you all day. I appreciate, from a show standpoint, I appreciate you coming on here and agreeing to do an interview, but just on a personal level, you've always been very good to me. I definitely recommend anyone listening or watching support what Dan's doing. Highly, highly underrated. One of the best out there. We will do this again at some point. I'm not sure when. Maybe after the Tigers win the division, which is hopefully this year. I don't know. Who knows? But either way, man, we'll talk at some point, just on a personal level here, real soon. But I appreciate you coming on, and always rooting for you and wishing you nothing but the best.
Same goes to you, CC. Appreciate you. That was a lot of fun. Hour goes by fast, doesn't it?
Exactly, for sure. We'll talk real soon.
You got it, buddy.
Yep. Good stuff as always, Dan. One of the most underappreciated announcers that there is, though I do see him getting more attention recently over the last few years, which I love, because Dan, outside of just being an excellent broadcaster, is a wonderful person as well. Really appreciated him hopping onto the program. Before we give our socials and kind of head out here, I do want to say I can't guarantee an episode next week. There is a family matter that I have to attend to next week. Everything's fine. No one is in danger. Everything's great. There's nothing at all to be concerned about. It's just for scheduling purposes, it's going to kind of be hard. I'm going to be away from Michigan. And so it's going to be hard for me to kind of book an interview. Potentially we get something going at the end of the week, or maybe we record something this weekend and we're able to get it up by the middle of next week. I'm not sure. I'll talk to Austin about it, but it's been a long time sans that holiday break since we've missed a week. And for an independent show that is responsible for getting its own guests, I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back too much or Austin on the back too much, but, you know, we've been very consistent with our uploading schedule. Things get in the way sometimes, I promise. Even if we do miss next week, we'll be back with a vengeance, and we're going to do some plowing of our own. So looking forward to that. If you like this video and you like our content, you go to castellanicontent.com. There you'll find the uploads, the links to everything that we create, ranging from movie reviews all the way to podcast, Michigan post-game videos, what have you. Obviously, the Lions season is over, but if you want to go back and rewatch every single one of the videos that we did for this Lions season, you can find it on castellanicontent.com, on Twitter at Castellani2014, TikTok at Chris Castellani. And if you're watching this on YouTube, like I said, hit that like button and that subscribe button, as we can. I really want to continue to grow on these platforms. People ask me, like, what's your version of success? And my thing is, if we see an upward trajectory, my hope is that at some point something pops off. But the worst place you can be is stagnant, because even if you're going downward, that's at least a message that you got to change things. But and if you're going upward, it means, hey, continue to pump out what you're pumping out. We are seeing kind of an upward trajectory with some of our content, depending on the platform that you look at. So that's definitely a good thing. And we are, look, it's crazy to say, we are, I think, less than a month out of spring training. Now, if the Tigers would do something, that would be nice, and we could have a nice meaty story to sink our teeth into. But for the time being, they are lying in wait. Hopefully that what I'm saying here ages poorly, but who knows? All right. Thank you guys so much for continuing to support Austin and I as we continue our trek through this journey. Continuing to work hard. I don't, whether we are or not, doesn't really matter. We're putting out stuff that you guys are responding to. That's the number one goal. So I appreciate y'all. You mean the world to us. Thanks for all the support. I will talk to you next episode. Have a good one. Peace and happiness.
It's an unfair game. We got to think differently.